Yeah, actually, I'll go ahead and give a quick intro just before, just introduce the series. So hi, everybody who's tuned in. Sorry, apologies, I had the YouTube live stream going and was getting some feedback. I'm back. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dylan DeKay Bemis. I'm the Economic Development Coordinator with the City of Tigard. We realize it's a really tough time to be a business owner, and we're hoping the content in tonight's webinar will be helpful as you're navigating these unprecedented times. This webinar is the first in a series of workshops designed to provide you with some tools and knowledge to help your business succeed. This series is being produced in collaboration between the Economic Development Departments of the cities of Forest Grove, Sherwood, Tigard, and Wilsonville. And I want to take a minute to introduce our partners, some of whom are on the call tonight. We have Lloyd Purdy from the City of Tigard, Jeff King from the City of Forest Grove, Bruce Coleman from the City of Sherwood, and Jordan Vance from the City of Wilsonville. We also have one of our other partners, Catherine Wiley, Membership Director with the Tigard Chamber of Commerce, who is graciously hosting this webinar on the Chamber's Zoom account. So thank you much, Catherine. Catherine's also our Zoom expert on the call. So if you have any technical questions that come up, please utilize the chat box and direct them at Catherine and she can help you out. She's also going to be monitoring the Q&A. So if you have any questions about any of the content throughout the night, feel free to drop those in the chat box, or if you'd like to direct those to Catherine, she can relay them to our presenter to make sure they get answered. The final and most important person on the call is our presenter, Maggie Riley with Craft3. Just a brief background on Maggie. She joined Craft3 in 2017 as a business lender and is responsible for generating new commercial loans in the Portland market, including the rural surrounding areas. Prior to joining Craft3, Maggie was the director of CASA Community Loan Fund, a community development financial institution focused on rural affordable housing across Oregon. She was also the director of Family Economic Opportunity Programs, where she oversaw the country's largest statewide matched savings account network at CASA of Oregon. Maggie has worked in Portland with two other CDFIs, Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, otherwise known as MISO, and also Mercy Corps Northwest. Maggie attended Lewis and Clark College in Portland, where she graduated with dual degrees in foreign languages and literature, Spanish and German, and international affairs. She also holds a certificate in community development finance from the University of New Hampshire's Carsey School of Public Policy. And with that intro, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Maggie, tonight's presenter.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you to all of the presenters and supporters for this evening, including the cities of Tigard, Forest Grove, Sherwood, and Wilsonville, and also to the Tigard Chamber of Commerce. I'm excited to kick off this series about with tonight, and we're going to start with managing business finances through COVID. So without further ado, I'll jump right in. If you have any questions, please chat them and we'll work through them as we go through content. I'll probably pause at a couple different sections just to make sure that we're collecting any questions and you've had a chance to digest the content presented so far. So not knowing who's in the room and who's watching, I'm happy to tailor this content. So if there's something really specific to your business or to your stage in business, please let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those questions. All right, so suffice to say, what a year, and it's been quite the wild ride so far. As we all know, and this is no surprise, we're in an economic crisis. It's one that has had a number of moving pieces, big picture, macroeconomic levels. We first started to experience economic crisis when our supply chain coming from China, for those of you who import or receive any raw materials from China, January, February, that started to take a hit. We then saw a demand shock from customers. Following after that, another shock to the system, where through the public health policy, needed to intervene, and that caused really led to a series of closures, which either, depending on your business, if you were non-essential, that stopped your revenues entirely from how you knew them. And if you were essential, which there was a little bit of a period even when construction shut down, your revenues were reduced temporarily. So no matter what kind of industry you're in, you're impacted by these macroeconomic conditions. And that is something that we are all managing, and it's evolving day to day. So I just want to kind of take a step back and acknowledge that this is something we've been experiencing for, depending on your business, even pre-shutdown. And most economists and people who are looking forward into when things will return to quote unquote normal are not expecting consumer confidence to pick up before there is widespread vaccine available. And so that's not going to be sometime this year. And so what can we do in the meantime to help work through this crisis? Especially when, as a business, you still have to pay your bills. You still have suppliers, you probably have creditors or debt to service. Rent is due, salaries are due. And so part of what we're going to look at tonight are managing through that crisis to a way that can help you work through COVID effectively. And so to do that, we're going to start with understanding your current financial position using your internal financial statements. By that, I mean your balance sheet primarily, but also either your income statement or profit and loss, depending on what you call it. We'll then just talk about a couple cash flow and scenario planning tools. So how can you effectively, what levers can you pull, and what tools do you have in your toolbox to help you with your cash position, absent of additional support from the federal government through the CARES Act, like the EIDL or the PPP. And then finally, if we have time, we'll dive into an exercise to calculate your new break-even. If you've never done a break-even, the same principles apply. And we just have a scenario where a business has some rent due, has some increased expenses, and how the business owner will manage through those. But effectively acknowledging that as business owners, you're really between that rock and a hard place right now. And I want to reassure you that you do have choices, and hopefully tonight's webinar will walk through some of those and leave you with a little bit of hope and a little bit of and some tools to move forward. So first, understanding your financial position. To do that, the tool that we use and we look at is what's called your balance sheet. And your balance sheet, for those of you who pass all of that to your accountant and rarely look at it, is something to pull out right now. It's a snapshot in time. It's a picture, if you will, instead of a movie. And so your balance sheet today, September 30th, close of the quarter, is going to look really different from what it did 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 12 months ago. It's a moment in time. And that moment in time tells you a lot about your current position. And when we think about your current position, we, as a business, there are two things I want to call out that are distinct to keep in mind during COVID. And that's the difference between liquidity and solvency. And what do I mean by that? First, solvency is about whether or not the business model is fundamentally workable. That absent of COVID, the business model is sound and the business has a good working model. For example, a restaurant, you might have been doing really well before the crisis, and your business model is fundamentally sound. The problem right now is a liquidity problem because of COVID. And so for businesses that are not solvent, there's a very different, those are harder conversations to have, frankly, because your business model isn't necessarily working, nor was it before COVID. Those businesses, sadly, are probably going to close regardless of what liquidity or interventions are available from either that you can exercise yourself or from local governments or other agencies. Liquidity, on the other hand, If we think about, since we're in Oregon, we can pick any crop, but I will pick hazelnuts because that's the season we're in, and we are not too far off down in Yamhill County. There are a number of hazelnut farms. So if you think of a farm or a hazelnut farm, for example, this year's crop, using this analogy, this year's crop is lost. So this is in my example, hazelnuts are doing fine actually, but pretend this year's crop is lost. So from a liquidity perspective, there's not really much that we can do to salvage that crop. But the land underneath, the trees are still very much solvent. They're still very much alive, and we just didn't get enough rain to produce the crop that we needed this year. And so the land is arable, the trees are healthy, but the conditions that the hazelnut trees needed to thrive just weren't there. So similarly for your business, you might think a way to look at it is, well, before COVID happened, was my business healthy? Was my financial position strong? Did I have a good stream of customers? And so if so, your business was solvent. And so what we can do right now really is address those shorter term liquidity needs and figure out, using a couple different tools, to understand what is your cash buffer. By that, what I mean, how many days can you sustain your business if you have all of your inflows stopped or reduced? We are now 6 months-ish into this economic crisis, and so I suspect that those businesses on this call have a very good understanding of what your cash buffer is right now, and you're watching your cash like a hawk. But fundamentally, we're trying to understand how long you can make it with reduced revenues, what your cash buffer is. Do you have enough operating cash flow to make it for another 3 months, 6 months, 9 months while revenues are still depleted? If some of you are in industries like construction, maybe you actually haven't experienced too much in terms of dips in revenues, but you're feeling challenges on the supply side. So I understand it's different also for different businesses. If you haven't had to close down entirely, there are some businesses actually that are doing really well right now, and others that are commensurately really hurting. So your business is going to have a unique set of needs and be on this continuum of solvency and also liquidity. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but these are tools that can help you work through these questions. On the next slide, I'm going to show a picture from a JP Morgan Chase study that showed most businesses have between 16 and 47 days of cash available depending on your industry. So cash buffer days, and this is a graphic that's several years old, but now widely popular and available because everybody's thinking about how much cash do you have on hand. For those of you who are in industries with really thin margins, restaurants, retail, for example, your cash buffer already was thin. And so the levers that you get to pull are already going to be different from if you were in one of the other like healthcare services, for example, or even real estate. Real estate is an industry that continues to do well right now because interest rates are low, there's a lack of inventory. So again, really depends on the type of business you have. But thinking about where your industry is, and then also number of cash buffer days. It's your it's your buffer before things get really tight and uncomfortable. And kind of a word about that, the way to build a cash buffer is something that happens over time. Saving for a rainy day is key. And I also acknowledge that a lot of us don't save habitually. We don't build our balance sheets on the asset side. That's okay. This isn't a mea culpa and to feel bad about what you didn't do. It's about changing for the future and using the tools you have to address the situation you're in now. The other piece too is that if you're sitting on a bunch of cash and you're saving it and it's doing nothing, that also doesn't necessarily help your business. You might be losing out on purchasing an asset that could, like a piece of equipment that could help you operate more efficiently, or hiring an employee that could help you generate more sales. So there's a balance, but in general, having a cash buffer is important to responding to any kind of crisis. And the other piece I want to add, so nobody feels bad, behaviorally, we're not good savers. If you look at any national statistics, we, as a country, don't really save for emergencies. We don't really save for retirement. And this also isn't a workshop on saving, but we do save during good times in order to spend during bad times. And so as we move through this crisis, keep that in mind. We save during good times to spend during bad times. We will be in good times again. Remember what I said now so that you can start planning to save little by little for bad times that are likely going to come again. How much should you be saving? How much cash should you have on hand? Amongst publicly traded firms, the median amount is 5% of 5% of sales, and the average is about 15%. The average is a little, or the mean is a little bit higher than the median, because publicly traded firms include both really small firms and also large firms like Apple or Microsoft. So that's why the numbers are a little different from the median to the mean. But overall, that median is 5% of sales. So that's the number right in the middle across all the firms is the median. There we go. So things to take into consideration with cash flow and kind of scenario planning. There are going to be things that you already know about with the type of business you have. What kind of seasonality do you have to plan for? Do you have to have any inventory builds? Like if you're a retailer, for example, what does the holiday season need to look like? Normally, if you are a retailer, you would be building inventory right now in preparation for winter. That's a type of seasonality that is unique to many retail businesses. If you're a ski resort, which probably none of you are, but maybe there's a ski resort out there, you have a lot of seasonality. Or if you're doing tours out to wine country, perhaps in Yamhill County, there's a lot of seasonality that comes with your business. And so part of cash flow and scenario planning is understanding first what seasonality impacts your business. Is it completely flat across the year? Do you have peaks and valleys? How do you manage those? How have you managed those in the past? And then what are your choices moving forward into this winter season, or depending on the type of when the seasonality is, your dips in cash flow. Other resources that we have, as you know, the PPP, EIDL, there have been a number of local grants and loans available during COVID. Those can help short term with cash flow, but that doesn't take away the need to do scenario planning. And so that's this next section we're going to go in, planning for these different what ifs and how can you adapt to the changing environment. A couple other pieces I put up on the screen. If we go into another round of closures, that would be a scenario to plan for. So what if we have to shut down again in December and January? What will your business do? How will you respond? And that's not fun to explore, but exploring that now will set you up for at least a better response if that happens again. Let's hope it doesn't, but if it does, at least you have a couple of ideas of, okay, during the last closures, that didn't work. This is what I need to do differently. I'll go into some different, I call them levers that we can pull to help you adapt through those uncertainties. Adaptation costs. If you are seeing people in person, do you have to have plastic barriers up? Do you have to provide masks for your customers, hand sanitizers for your customers? If it's an office space or if you have a lot of people, do you have to change your HVAC system for ventilation? If you're a restaurant, roll up doors, open windows. What are things not only that you can do to instill consumer confidence to bring people back, but also that you're just required to do? So how do you do that? And then a quick shout out, I believe the business recovery centers in Washington County, many of which are housed at chambers, do have the different equipment available for small businesses if you need masks or hand sanitizers. So a shout out to the business recovery centers in Washington County. If you do need those resources, I believe those are available. So get those resources for your business. Finally, debt service. If you do have any business loans, planning for, again, what happens if I can't make that payment? What are my choices? How do I communicate with my creditor? And then finally, pricing adjustments. Should you be increasing your prices to respond to your increased costs? And that could include adaptation costs like the ones we talked about. That could include maybe your supplies are more expensive because of other supply chain issues. It's hard for me to say without knowing which businesses are out in the room or out in the world joining us, but those are some of the things that I would encourage you to consider. So next, let's talk about the different levers to pull. First, I want you to remember it feels like you're between a rock and a hard place, but you do have choices. Big picture, they may not be the best choices, but you do have choices. And so big picture, we want to decrease working capital. So decreasing that churn, if you will, of working capital that's needed to keep your business going. And we want to manage your cash using both your assets and your liabilities, and exercising what flexibility you have there. That might include liquidating assets, perhaps, if you have them, to give yourself some cash to pay bills. So there are strategies that we can explore as you do scenario planning. A couple of things before we start this fun Garfield game of what do I do and how do I figure out if this is a good idea. When you start working with either creditors or vendors, suppliers to explore ways that they can be flexible to help you and you can be flexible also to help them, I want to just share a couple high-level negotiation factoids or tips. One, there's an idea of reciprocity that it gets applied in negotiations and applied in all relationships, right? If I go into a relationship treating you a certain way, you're likely to reciprocate. You're likely to treat me that same way too. And so going into those conversations, whether it's with your landlord to say, hey, I know that you have to pay the rent as well, or you have to pay your mortgage, and you can't do that if I don't pay rent. I'm just not able to do that full amount right now. Here's what I can't do. And so being just treating people, and for the most part, everybody's really hurting. Just keeping that in mind will help set up that relationship and set you up for positive negotiations. And then using my example, just being clear on what you need. Being clear to say, hey, I need another 15 days perhaps to pay this bill, or I can only pay $3,000 a month instead of $4,000 of my rent because my sales have gone down. Here's my plan. Here's what I propose, so I can still make good on that amount. Being flexible so that you can have room within your negotiations. So maybe your landlord says, sorry, I can't go down to 3,000. Maybe you actually could go up to 3,500. So maybe you can give a little and spend a little bit more on rent that month. or stagger payments. So being able to go into those conversations with flexibility and creativity, so openness to problem solving with the person you're negotiating with, is something to keep in mind. The other piece to that is starting that negotiation with with kind of the best outcome that you want. So if you're really aiming for $3,000, start with $3,000, and you should start and lead that conversation. Don't let your landlord lead that conversation. That helps prime, or in the biz, it's called anchoring the other party to that number. And so all your negotiation will revolve around that number. So if you make the opening bid, you're in a stronger position to get what you want. But within that, do have some flexibility. The other piece is that if you make an offer as high as you can with your perspective in mind and setting a strong first offer, that just focuses the attention on your needs. So a couple of things before we dive in to think about as you have those conversations. I hope everybody didn't fall off the call once I put a sample balance sheet up here. But really, I want to call out, let's see if I can do this with a little spotlight. So starting with your different levers. So you have your accounts receivable, for example. Can you shorten the terms to get paid faster? I don't know. Maybe that's one thing that you can explore. Are you sitting on too much inventory? Inventory that could be converted to cash to help you pay your bills. This is in this example business. It's hard to see how much inventory is too much, but that's something to keep in mind. Down here, looking at equipment, still on the asset side. Do you have maybe some equipment that you could sell? Are you utilizing all of your equipment? Could that equipment convert to cash to help you maintain your business and operations? So on the left side of your balance sheet, those are some choices to start exploring as you plan those scenarios of like, well, what happens if I don't have enough cash? What can I do? Then on the right side of your balance sheet, on the flip side, if you do have accounts receivable and payable, overall, there's a lot here where there's flexibility. Accounts payable is one, notes payable is another. But let's talk about accounts payable. If you have a creditor or a supplier who is a large firm, is really flexible, and you've been working with them for a long time, they probably are going to be willing to be flexible with you if you are honest and go in to say, hey, I can't pay in net 15, I need to pay in net 30. And what you've done effectively is gotten a small interest-free loan, or maybe it's net 45, to buy yourself time before that is a cash outflow. On the flip side, if you can shrink the receivable, you can increase that span and provide yourself with cash when you need it. So it's a cash management tool, if you will. Some others that are less flexible: wages payable, you have to pay your employees. Taxes payable, you have to pay your taxes. If you have tax liability, though, that you cannot handle, working with either the Department of Revenue, or whether that's the state of Oregon or the IRS, to set up a payment plan is something that they are more than happy to do. And ultimately, you still will have to pay those taxes. But in my experience in working with small businesses and either the Department of Revenue or the IRS, setting up a payment plan is something that's an option that you can explore if you need it. And then finally, notes payable. What are some long-term? So we have the 12 months, and then beyond that, looking long-term, what kind of flexibility do you have? Finally, and this depends on your business and where you are, one way to bring cash to a business could be to sell a portion and bring in an equity investor. That would dilute your ownership, and so that's something just for you to consider whether or not that's the right move for you, but it is a lever you can pull. Again, looking back to the last slide, it's about removing yourself from being in a rock and a hard place to a place where you can identify choices that you have, levers that you can pull. They're not all great, but at least it puts you in the position of making that choice for you and for your business. And that's where I want you to be. Oops, I gotta take away my arrow. There we go. I think that worked. Okay, there we go. Cash management during COVID. So like I mentioned earlier, here are some specifics. Can you either decrease or shorten your accounts receivable? Can you increase the accounts payable? What happens if you reduce inventory to help generate some more cash? Earlier, we talked about increasing prices. And actually something to point out with accounts receivable and payable, if your suppliers and your vendors are other small businesses, what you do is going to impact them as well. And so keeping in mind that relationship, they might be struggling too, but you still might be able to push somewhere. So it's worth a conversation, it's worth exploring. And like I said earlier, with the principles of kind of negotiation, going in honestly and earnestly, but also with, hey, this is what I need, and just see what they say. It doesn't hurt to ask. Reducing or increasing prices is another way to generate additional cash. Obviously, that can have a possible negative customer impact, but there are companies out there that are adding a COVID surcharge to acknowledge, hey, this is the cost of all the PPE and stuff that I had to adjust with my business in order to in order to be able to operate. And unfortunately, I have to pass that on to the customer. So if that's applicable to you, or maybe if something in your supply chain has increased in price because of COVID, it's a little easier to pass that on to the customer. But there can be possible negative impacts. So again, in this contingency or scenario planning, what if I increase my prices by 3%? What does that do? What does that do to my cash? And then what are the downsides to that? So evaluating both the pros and the cons. The other piece that you can explore, negotiating with your landlords and negotiating with your creditors. You probably have experience doing this already, and so keep doing that as needed, especially if you have a landlord who is or a creditor who can afford to be more flexible. You're a small business, and so push to get what you need. They'll probably be fine. Ask for what you need. It doesn't hurt to ask. And so some strategies could include, instead of having a large balance due, asking to basically divide that extra amount that has been deferred over the remaining life of your lease, so that you've just increased your rent month over month, say starting in 2022 or late 2021, when we expect consumer confidence to return after having a widespread and available vaccine. And then same with creditors. First, I would ask what creditor or which creditors are key to your survival, and which ones are lower priority. Are there ones where, for example, you can just make the minimum monthly payment and get by? Are there ones where there's an expectation for a full monthly payment? Can you ask for an interest-only period, deferred payments? If you have seasonality with your business, starting perhaps is in the winter, let's say, starting that conversation now with your creditor to be upfront and say, look, it's been a rough year. I'm going into winter. That's my slow season. And I'm not going to be able to do interest only. I need a full deferred payments for the months of should be flexible to keep them informed. I think that's probably, as a lender, I'm working at a nonprofit lender, communicate, and be transparent. that is going to keep your creditors assured that they will get paid back and ultimately give you the flexibility you need to keep going. So before we jump into the next section, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions. Yeah. So one that first comes immediately. So I don't know if this business has overhead, has any fixed expenses, but the choices that come to mind, because you probably don't have accounts receivable or payable, it could be your salary, your own salary. So if you, for example, don't need to take a salary from the business, perhaps somebody else in your home is working, or if you have been able to get unemployment. I know that's been really tricky for people who are self-employed. So that would be one lever to pull to keep your business afloat. Maybe you take a reduced salary, or you don't take a salary for a period of time. The other tricky thing for a wedding business, I would suspect, is that you have deposits and perhaps even bookings to deliver goods in 2020, maybe, depending on when you started and what your customers look like, that are getting pushed to 2021. And so a strategy there for you could be, well, either I'm pushing all this business to 2021, and how do I take on more bookings? I don't know, sorry. Is that an opportunity to contract with somebody or share with, as you build your business, contract with somebody who could work under you next year to plan those or to coordinate those events? Let's say if you have too many, like some falling on 2 different weekends, so you're not losing that revenue. That's another idea of kind of a lever you could pull. Does the business have, I guess, wouldn't have inventory, probably doesn't have a landlord relationship, or may, probably at this stage doesn't have any loans. And so one thing you could ask for on the cash flow side are, you could play with your deposits. Maybe I don't know what you ask for with deposits up front, but being flexible with in asking what you need. And that could either be to say, hey, it's COVID, I actually need a little bit more up front, or because of COVID, and this probably also would help you build some goodwill as an event planner or as a wedding planner in the community. Keep that contract signed and accept that payment, but also being flexible with and very communicative, almost as if you're a creditor with your client, to be able to say, hey, I understand that we were planning this wedding for this year. You decided to do the courthouse and scrap the whole thing because you just wanted to get married in 2020. But I still have your deposit. So you as a business would have to make that call. What do I do with that deposit? And it could buy you goodwill to offer, let's do a party next year. Or I'm willing to refund 50%, 75%, whatever your rate is that you negotiated in your contract, to have that cash come back to you. So that's another way to, if you're seeing cancellations, to bring some cash back home. Okay, sounds good. All right. So hopefully I don't put people to sleep with this next section on a break-even analysis. So I wish we were in person for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that I would ask is, to everybody, why is this important? Why do we need to know our break-even analysis? What is it? And it's really, your break-even tells you how much in revenue does the business needs to generate to cover its costs. The calculation is up on the screen. Your fixed cost divided by the price of the item minus variable costs. This is important because if the calculation reports that you will break even after selling 500 units or booking 20 weddings, that will help decide whether your business is feasible. And so going back, and by feasible, I mean solvent. So going back to that first slide, this is almost that litmus test for a solvency question. Does your business model as it exists, still work? And then if not, going back to those levers we just talked about on the fixed costs side, and then price and variable costs, where can you pull some levers to make this business one that is solvent? If you're already solvent and this is and COVID is really a short-term blip, hopefully, that's a different story. Actually, I'm going to turn my light on because it's September 30th and I need to be able to see better. Just a moment. Sorry about that. Should have started the webinar with that in mind. Talk about scenario planning. Okay, so the next as an extension of this, if you don't think that you can sell the number of units that the business needs to cover its costs, then this may not be either the business may not be solvent, or you might have to just rework things. And that's okay if you just have to rework things. A lot of businesses are reworking their business models right now, so that they can turn enough profit to cover their to break even, frankly. So please stay awake as I bore you. Go into the specifics on how we get to this calculation. So starting with costs, here's what we're talking about when we talk about variable costs and fixed costs. Variable, you don't have a ton of control over. Merchant service fees are just a percentage, so you don't necessarily have the ability to dictate. Maybe you do with your vendor. You can negotiate sometimes what that's going to be. If you have shipping costs, you have some wiggle room with shipping costs, but those are going to change depending on what you're shipping, the volume of shipping, the place to where you're shipping. All of these things are going to change. Same with wages and same with raw materials. So those are a lot of things that will fluctuate over time. Your fixed costs, those are going to be the same no matter how much you sell. It includes any kind of startup costs. It includes recurring costs like rent, insurance, if you have, and then anything that was used in startup, because you have to make those expenditures before you actually can sell anything. That's why equipment is in there. That's why, yeah, so you have to pay that regardless of what you sell. That's independent of it. The recurring costs, the variable costs, those are ones that you absorb with each unit that you sell. So if you have a, let's see, if you have a company where the cost of paper, let's say you're a greeting card company or a letter press, and the cost of paper is fluctuating, that's something that you just can't control and you have to work with. On your financial statements and your profit and loss, we often talk about cost of goods sold, COGS, cost of services sold. Those are the direct materials costs. It's variable and it's directly tied to what it takes to generate either your widget, what it is you're selling, or your service. It's kind of an undisputed component of the calculation. Most businesses are going to have cost of goods. the event planner, the wedding planner has the service, the cost of your good is a service effectively. And so that there's going to be a certain amount of staffing required, regardless of production, let's say. COGS, cost of goods sold, are used to calculate gross profit margin. And that's our first step in calculating a break even. We'll get there in a moment. Pricing is the next piece that flows into this equation. There are a lot of different ways to come up with your price. Most businesses figure out what it's going to cost to produce an item, and then they go during the first bullet. Some industries, like let's say a restaurant, are more on price-based costing. A consumer may not be willing to pay for $20 for a hamburger, even if it costs you $20 to source a delicious brioche bun and a fancy patty and artisanal cheese and lettuce that was grown 10 minutes away from a local farm. The market may not support that. So businesses in that position have to decide, what is the consumer willing to spend based on the competition in the industry. Cost-based pricing would be, it's going to cost me $4 to make this hamburger or this veggie burger, and I know that I need to have a certain profit margin to cover all my expenses, so I'm going to charge $11 for it. It's less arbitrary than that. Considerations, obviously the cost of goods sold, so understanding what goes into the cost for each item. Legal constraints, you might be in an industry where you're not allowed to charge more than a certain amount. If you're an insurance company, for example, or a healthcare company, there might be regulatory or legal constraints that say you cannot charge beyond X. So there could be caps involved. And then obviously there are market constraints. For a small business that's located downtown Portland, you might have market constraints that are different from a small business that's located downtown Tigard. Maybe not, but just thinking about what the local market and your customers are willing to, what that will bear. So we're going to jump into a quick, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. A little bit of both. I would say, let me jump back to that slide. I think part of that is understanding your industry and doing a market analysis to see, if there are legal constraints, like I mentioned, there's really nothing you can do, or there's very little you can do. But if you are just a general small business, I would start personally with a market analysis, and that's something actually that your local small business development center can help you with, and also the local library has great resources. Your local librarian can do all this research for you for free, and so can the small business development center, to understand within your industry what kind of choices do you have in terms of pricing. Part of that most of that actually is going to be industry driven. And using like my hamburger example, that's a little different than thinking about the wedding planner in the audience, who is going to be probably doing a little bit of each, but it's more likely on going to be price-based costing. What is a consumer willing to spend for a full day event, and what is the average? And to get there, doing some research just within your industry to understand, like, what is the average cost for a wedding planner. If you're a photographer, it might be similar. There are going to be obviously some costs to produce the item, but service-based industries typically fall in the price-based costing. And then if you're producing a thing, that's often in the cost-based pricing category, typically. But industry research will help you understand which lane to fall into, if you will. I love that strategy. I mean, I think going back to Garfield, like looking at what levers to pull, that's what businesses should do that anyway, is really just continue to evaluate to a certain degree the status quo. What do I really need? What efficiencies can I gain? There have been some amazing stories, at least through my experience working with the city of Tigard recently this year, just in seeing businesses adapt to this new environment and ask those questions to either shop around for better cost and better priced insurance, negotiate with vendors so that they could have better priced raw materials, ask the question, do I really need a space now that everything is virtual? Will I need that space in the long run? So I think those are excellent questions to be asking. And, you know, market-wise, I think the key is, like, my personal opinion is that we are getting trained effectively through a new set of social behaviors with what business interaction looks like. And so it will be more acceptable to have a Zoom meeting down the road instead of somebody coming to your place of business, to your office. I think people will still have their coffee shop meetings and still want to meet in person, but if you are in an industry where you don't need a space to produce your thing or your service, I would be asking, really, I would be, to be honest, asking myself, do I really need this? Is this a need or a want? And can I still have an excellent customer experience with my clients by doing Zoom and meeting in a coffee shop, let's say, and saving myself $3,000 a month on rent? But definitely shopping around as much as possible, and remembering that a lot of small businesses are hurting, but if you can get flexibility and find a better, like a lower price for insurance, I think that that's something worth exploring. Yeah, I think that's great advice. Okay. For customer base, sorry. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, some of the things that I've, you know, looking at a coffee shop example or a restaurant example, on that side, one, I've seen business owners who may have had employees. Unfortunately, they had to lay off those employees or reduce their hours. Those business owners are rolling up their sleeves and participating in their business again in a way that they haven't for a while. So that means coffee shop owners who were coffee shop owners and maybe just used to ordering and managing the books and managing their managers now are back doing what they love, which was why they got into business in the first place. And so that also has given them a vantage point to see, wow, I didn't realize that this was so inefficient, that this is what was our system. So we've seen, or I've seen at least anecdotally, businesses make different decisions on like ordering, whether that's for if you're a coffee shop, as an example. Obviously, you're scaling back what your inventory looks like, but what days you're buying, ways to minimize waste, ways to promote, and restaurants do this a lot too, promote certain products or menu items, for example, so that you can reduce or eliminate waste altogether. So that's more money, that more revenue you're generating out of your items. I've seen coffee shops completely reconfigure, and actually borrowers of mine who are restaurants too, completely reconfigure their spaces to have really good customer flow. And actually some of my retail clients have done this too, where they've reconfigured their spaces entirely. So there's a way to have only the limited amount of people that you're allowed to have in your space at a time, and be able to do that to instill consumer confidence so that people linger and they buy more stuff. So that when somebody walks in your door, because you're not seeing the same traffic that you used to, you're able to, and I hate to say this, you're able to squeeze more revenue out of that, or larger sales. The basket value, for example, would be higher, or the transaction value would be higher out of that person. So creating an environment that instills consumer confidence has been something that's been working really well. And I would say that would apply for restaurants, hairstylists, or coffee shops, industries like that, where you want people to linger and really get the full experience and hopefully spend some more money. So a hairstylist customer who has that kind of slower, more relaxed environment also rearranged the products so that as you're going to the chair, you pass all of these instead of having them by the door. So just small layout changes to encourage people to just interact with things that they could possibly buy. If you're a pure service-based company, and you're not selling things that go along with your service, trying to think, it really actually, when I'm thinking about my portfolio of my borrowers, they have adapted to by negotiating with their landlords is the biggest one, because that's typically their biggest expense is rent. And that's been touch and go, to be honest, depending on who their landlord is. The local guys seem to be more flexible than the big corporate ones, who maybe are based in, like, I hate to pick on California, but picked down in California. So that's one area that true service-based businesses tend to have the highest expense and need the most flexibility. The other one that comes to mind, again, if you're a true service-based industry, is working with your accounts payable and receivable. So if you are a consultant of some kind, or doing, or perhaps an event planner or wedding planner, working with your accounts payable and receivable so that you're stretching out your cash cycle as much as you can is another strategy. And then lastly, building consumer confidence through either communicating on your website or Facebook, or however you have how you present your business externally, so that those customers can really feel comfortable coming to your place of business and can say, hey, this is what we're doing. For if you're thinking of like hairstylists, salons, like waxing services, that I've seen just be really communicative with their customers via email to say, this is what we're doing, here are precautions, basically to say, feel safe coming to us. And those businesses have been doing well in recovering their lost revenue. the end of the day, they still have 4 months of rent that they have to figure out how to pay back. But at least now that customers have been allowed to go back, those are some tactics that they've utilized to help with revenues. So I think it comes down to consumer confidence. Yeah. Perfect. And actually, to that point, I mean, for businesses on the line that aren't connected with their local chamber, where you not only have a good pulse for what's happening in that community, what the legal requirements are, but those are resources. And it's also a place just to connect with other businesses that are going through the same thing in your town. And I think there's a lot of value in that kind of support that you can get from other businesses, and have either low cost or free workshops to walk you through how do you make sense of all of this, because it's overwhelming. So I love that the Tigard Chamber put something like that on. All right. Hopefully everyone's still awake. And actually, how are we on time? I think I'm still okay. I won't blitz through. Okay, good. All right, so really high level. Here is an example of how I was referencing earlier how to calculate a break even. We have the costs, the sales price. We have the variable cost. We have the fixed costs, or the operating costs, and that will tell you how many units that you need to break even. So what happens to Katie's kaleidoscopes when, and actually here's a different way to look at it. You take your fixed cost, your gross profit margin, your revenue less your variable costs. So this is another way to back into it if that math makes more sense to you. So I'll let that sit up on the screen for a second. I just want to acknowledge that there are different ways to get to the same number, and lots of different learning styles. And usually when we're in person, people's eyes glaze over and they feel nauseous. So I hope nobody's feeling too nauseous, or that your eyes aren't glazing over when you see the gross profit margin approach. In this business example, I wanted to throw in a couple, what happens? So for 2021, her rent has increased dramatically because she now has all this back rent due. So next year she has a new break even she has to calculate effectively, because her costs have gone up, and her landlord said, you know what, I can't spread out all your monthly payments through the rest of your lease term. I need to get paid all in 2021. So Katie only has a certain amount of options, and she has to calculate kind of with these adjustments her new break even, her new normal. Another is, well, with wages, she was thinking about quitting her job because she runs this business part-time, or let's say she has some employees running it. Can she afford to take that much of a salary next year? That's another way for you as a business owner to say, what can I afford if I, as part of my household, am relying on bringing in a certain amount a year? What can my business support? How much do I have to sell in order to support that salary? How much do I have to sell in order to repay all of my rent next year that I've accrued over the last 6 to 8 months? So the the point of this is, as you are hit with these different changes, you might be asking yourself and having the conversation in your household, I don't think I can bring home the salary I expected. So or I absolutely need to bring home the salary in order to pay my mortgage or my rent, in order to put food on the table, in order to support my household. How much do I absolutely have to sell next year? And what are my choices? I hope that nobody's in the situation of owing $50,000 in rent in a year. This is mostly to give me round numbers to work with, but it's probably plausible that there are businesses who, if they had deferred rent for all of 2020 effectively, or at least for 9 months of 2020, that's a lot to catch up on. That's a lot to digest if your landlord isn't willing to space that out over the rest of your lease term. That's where I would start with your landlord, actually, is amortizing it over the balance of your lease and possibly even extending your lease or asking for forgiveness. But if you are hit with that high amount of rent, this is where you do want to look at, okay, I need to recalculate my break even to see how much do I have to sell? How many weddings do I have to book? How many shoes do I have to sell? How many kaleidoscopes do I have to sell? How many haircuts do I have to do? It really doesn't matter, because you're answering the same question. How many units do I have to sell in order to pay these fixed costs that I can't control? So we have, like I said, what happens if fixed operating costs go up? What happens if supplies become more expensive and she has to increase the sales price because of the sales type approach that we talked about earlier? And then finally, if the variable operating costs change. So before, the variable operating costs were $5, and in this example, we're increasing them to $7.50. Maybe insurance went up. If unfortunately, I think we're going to see, for people who are in, or for businesses and probably households that are living in areas vulnerable to fires, much like flood insurance, it's not unlikely that we'll see an increase in insurance in places where there were a lot of fires and continue to be fires. So what happens if her insurance goes up? So here's the formula and just some different scenarios to show, well, what do we do if there's that increase in an increase in rent or an increase in salary, any kind of operating increase? What happens if the cost of supplies go up, and you have to increase your price? Or what happens if you don't have to increase your price, you just want to increase your price, and you can, and the market will bear it. You haven't increased the cost of your haircuts are still $5, and you're like, I really should be paying, they should be charging them way more than $5, but let's say $7.50 in this example. So again, what are your different levers? How do you calculate it? And then what, on the unit side, what does that mean you have to sell? And remember, once you cover your break even, then you generate profit. So until you've covered all of those and generated enough revenue to cover all those expenses, including your cost of goods, because a lot of businesses think, oh, I did a lot in sales. Sales isn't profit. And so for you as a business owner to go back and think about, how much do I need to sell to break even? That's to get me to zero, because anything from there, that's the gravy that I want. And when you have that gravy, totally going back to the earliest part of this presentation, that's when you're able to do things, you're able to build your balance sheet. You're able to, let me get back to the balance sheet. So when you are, right there. When you generate additional cash, that's when you can start investing in more assets. That could be buying in bulk, for example. That could be saving for a rainy day or emergencies like now. That could be buying equipment that is going to make you more efficient. If you are a baker and you are you're making all of your products by hand, and you want to buy it's probably not the case for any bakery, but you want to buy a KitchenAid mixer. Once you start generating profit, not just sales, but profit, then you can save up to buy that fancy Hobart mixer that you need to operate more efficiently, which helps improve your gross profit margin, which generates more cash. So this is the beginning. The break even really is the foundation of, in my opinion, ways to build wealth for yourself through your business. Because until you break even, you can have all the sales you want, but if you don't pay all those expenses, the variable and the fixed expenses, you don't have any gravy yet. And it must be, since I'm using all these food examples, I do love food, and it's also that hour. So forgive me for all these putting gravy on everything, but effectively, you want to not just focus on sales, but focus on your bottom line and any of those sales or revenues that are going to get you to pay those expenses. And then anything from there, the profit really is the key that you are looking for to both build your balance sheet and give you that cushion for times of crisis like we're in now. So with that, I will pass it back for questions, and happy to go into more detail on anything presented tonight or answer any other general questions.
Well, thank you so much, Maggie. I think the final, we have another one here. The question is, who can a business owner contact to provide them with one-on-one advice about their business? I know we talked about the Business Recovery Center. I would agree. I think chambers are a great place to connect with peers and do a lot of learning. What's been your experience, and do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, start locally. So start with your local chamber. Other business owners are also great sources of advice, because many times, if they're not a direct competitor and they've been around for a long time, they've lived through this too. And they, in my experience at least, are very generous in sharing with other business owners ways to work through challenges. And to be honest, sometimes it's better to hear from a peer instead of someone like me who is not a business owner. So working with, starting local, joining your chamber, going to meetings, and talking to other business owners is a great way to get some advice. The local business recovery centers is another one. Washington County has 4. I believe it depends on where people are from, but Beaverton, Tualatin, Forest Grove, and Sherwood. Is that the other one? Forgive me for not. Of the business recovery centers. Great. Perfect. Yeah, Hillsborough. And then the other resource, the Small Business Development Center, and that is housed through Portland Community College. So there are lots of campuses to choose from. Portland Community College's Small Business Development Centers have not only experts who can work with you one-on-one, but they also have a special team called the Capital Access Team. And so if you're thinking about borrowing any money, they're a great resource to work with. And they have an amazing team with locations all throughout the region. And then those are kind of the public resources. The nonprofit resources, nonprofit small business organizations that I would recommend checking out include Microenterprise Services of Oregon, MISO. They're really skilled at working with startups and existing businesses alike. And then Mercy Corps Northwest is another great resource. Both of those organizations offer resources in different languages too, and also are doing all their classes either online, counseling online, so you can get that one-on-one support that you need for your business. It's free, and they are mostly grant funded. So they're just those two organizations are good resources. If depending on your industry, if you're in construction, the Oregon Association of Minority Entrepreneurs, OAMI, is another resource. Check out related to small businesses. And then there's an organization called Livelihood Northwest that offers a program called the Increase Project. And Livelihood Northwest used to be the Portland State University Business Outreach Program. They rebranded last year, and they're now Livelihood Northwest, and they offer one-on-one counseling, as well as for existing businesses. The Increase Project is kind of a streetwise MBA for companies that have been around the block, know their business, know their industry. Maybe they don't have a formal MBA from a higher educational institution, but they have so much experience and knowledge, and that's a great way to connect with other businesses. So I just rattled off a handful of resources.
Yeah,
I would go on, but I won't.
No, I agree. I would add to that, your local city where you've licensed your business is a great resource as well. And we have City on the call and put this together. They have, a variety of resources, including, I know for the city of Tigard, they have been able to put together different funding opportunities. And so if you're not on, their listserv for information, it's a good place to be as well. So,
and as you grow your business, to figure out things like permitting, licensing, all of that stuff, your city has friendly people available to help you with just navigating all of that, because I'm not an expert in it, and you don't have to be either. You can go to your friendly city, whether it's the economic development manager or somebody in a planning department. They will help you with those kinds of questions of, what business license do I need? How do I do that? So yeah, that is a really good reminder. I think we forget about those resources in our backyard.
I know they're very helpful here in Tigard. Can't recommend them enough.
They are. I know. I know Tigard. I'm biased, but it's a great team of people there.
Well, I don't have any more questions in the chat for today. If you had any closing thoughts, I don't know if we want to turn it back over to Dylan, but this has been lovely. Thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Maggie. That was great. Great material. And thanks to everyone who was able to join us. As I mentioned before, this is the first in a series of webinars. So the next workshop will be on October 21st. The topic for that one is going to be restaurant preparation for fall and winter sales. We're still finalizing the time on that, so details will be forthcoming. So as Catherine just mentioned, be sure that you're in touch with your local economic development department, and just keep an eye on city social media and newsletters for updates on that webinar. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an ongoing webinar series, and it's designed for you as business owners. We want to provide you with the best tools and education to help your business succeed. So if you have any thoughts about future topics you'd like to see covered, please feel free to reach out to myself or Lloyd or Catherine or Maggie or any of the other economic development folks that are helping put this series together. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if anybody's still on the line and has ideas, feel free to put it in the chat box or a YouTube comment, and we'll definitely take those into consideration. But yeah, thanks again to Maggie and everybody who put this together. And thanks for coming out, and we hope to see everybody at the next workshop.
All right. And with that, I'm going to end our broadcast live.